As you might be able to tell by looking at me, I just got back from a doctor's appointment this morning. I have been diagnosed yet again, and this time my diagnosis is terminal. I am terminal. Gosh, Crazy Lake, what's going on now? I hear you asking from the other side of your screen. Just a couple weeks ago, you went out and you saw one of them there head doctors and came back and told us you'd been diagnosed with Yabbitt's disease. Well, it's something somewhat similar. Let me start at the beginning. Kinda. So again, I receive lots of wonderful unsolicited advice on this channel. I've learned more about a lot of the homesteading stuff that we do around here from comments from supportive viewers who know more about this stuff than I knew in the first place, and it's really helped. Stuff about horticulture, a lot of the agriculture. So I do take a lot of the comments from our regular viewers to heart. So one very common theme is that I need therapy. Okay, and that's how I ended up getting diagnosed with Yabbitt's disease here just a few weeks back anyway. You know, I'm not going to beat that horse. It's already dead. I'll put the video up at the end of this one if you missed it. It's called I've Been Diagnosed. You can go back and hear all about Yabbitt's disease. Well, a lot of folks said stop listening to the vertically challenged individuals who live under bridges who were constantly telling me that, you know, I need therapy, something's wrong with me, I'm bat crap crazy. Try as I might, I think if so many people are saying it, there must be something to it, right? So I came up with an idea. I decided to go see a head shrink that was of the youngest generation who are now adults, who would of course be Generation Z. That last guy I saw, he was somewhere between baby boomers and Generation Xers. He's like 10 or 15 years older than me. Maybe, yeah, I think he was like on the very bottom part of being a baby boomer. So I did my research and I found this doctor, this therapist that's supposed to be able to help people like me who, you know, my viewers, so many wonderful viewers they don't know necessarily what the diagnosis is, but they know I need some sort of help. So he's supposed to be able to get help for guys like me or help guys like me. So I go to him. He's very young. I mean, he's young enough to be my son. You know, he's Generation Z, right out of college, which I'm viewing as a strength because he would know like the newest trends, right? So we talk a little bit, the informal formalities of small talk. And he says, okay, listen. He says, as you can tell, I'm considerably younger than you and I'm very young for this profession. And I said, well, yeah, I can see that. And I figure that's probably a good thing because you just got out of school and you know what's up, what's the newest, what's the latest. And he says, well, I'm formulating my own theory. I'm formulating my own method of psychoanalysis and psychotherapeutic treatment. So in a way, you're going to kind of be a test subject, but I really believe there's something to this. And I said, well, thinking about it, I thought, well, I guess I was a test subject and a guinea pig for, you know, the people who run the machine, you know, years ago when I got back from Iraq and was in that Army hospital and then went through my experience with the VA and did all kinds of test stuff for them. Made it through. What harm could this young man do, you know? So I said, okay, Doc. I was calling him Doc out of respect. Let's go for it. And he goes, okay. He says, I want you to think of somebody that you very strongly dislike. Someone that just, you feel your blood boil perhaps if you see them. That's how much you dislike them. And I said, well, Doc, I don't have anyone like that in my life. And he said, come on, there's got to be somebody. And so I explained to him my take on this. This is my philosophy. This is how I live my life. Now, I haven't always been like this. I kind of came to this conclusion about 10 years ago. But it occurred to me one day while I was hating somebody from my past life that it took just as much energy for me to hate that person as it took for me to love the people I love, like my wife and my son. And so I decided that day to no longer hate. I'm just not going to waste my energy on that emotion on people who aren't worth it, because I'm going to use that energy to give that love to my wife and my son. So I don't hate anybody. I told this young doctor that, and he's looking at me like, well, I guess like I'm bat crap crazy. But I didn't let that bother me, because that's why I was there in the first place, right? He's just looking at me. I'm waiting for his response. I'm waiting for him to tell me how great of a theory that is on my part, and tell me that he planned on implementing that into his psychoanalytic therapeutic stuff. That's not what he said. He said, that's a term that's not allowed in this office. I said, what term? He said, the H word. Thinking about it, I'm thinking, did I say hell? That hurt a little bit. Looking over there thinking about it. Well, I couldn't figure it out. So he wrote it on a piece of paper and he held it up for me, and I said, hate. He said, don't say that word. Don't say that term. I said, okay. He puts his paper down. He says, when you feel like saying that word, say strongly dislike. And I'm like, okay. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, I'm dealing with a Generation Zer. These folks are known to be offended by just about anything. Maybe that word offends him. Sorry, I thought I heard something that sounded like someone or something knocking on the side of a tree with a big stick or something. Anyway, he says, when you feel like saying that word, that term, use the phrase strongly dislike. Use that term instead. I'm like, okay. I tell him, Doc, I can appreciate your strong dislike of the word that I'm not going to use in this instance, but I don't have anyone like that in my life, because I have no use for those people, so I just have nothing to do with them. I want to spend my time and my energy with people that matter, not the people that don't. He said, okay. He said, I'm only going to give you an hour for free. I don't want to really start charging you right off the bat until after this first appointment. So can we speed things up? Think of somebody who in the past you strongly disliked and you've now put out of your life. So I'm thinking about it. Okay. Well, one came to mind, and I kind of thought I might be telling this story about this doctor's appointment today up here for the viewers, which obviously I am. So I thought of someone who many of you have read about. You know, I told a story about a week ago about the radio DJ that had that show that he had 1 hour's worth of time where people could call in with their potential Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings, and how he was threatened and was going to get beaten up, kind of like this, because people thought he was making fun of people that believed in Bigfoot Sasquatch, even though he wasn't. He was just doing his job. And people were amazed to find out that story written about that instance, I think in Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 3 or 4, one of the two, I can't remember, was actually based on fact. So I thought of a real person that another story that took place in Bigfoot Sasquatch Files, I believe Volume 3, was actually based on. You remember the story called Gaslighting? That story, the individual who had a very unfortunate demise at the end of that story, what, we would think was she was dispatched by a Bigfoot Sasquatch, though it was written off as it was a bear killing, bear mauling. That was based on a real person. The story is called Gaslighting, and it was based on a real bona fide gaslighter. I'm going to have to move over this way. I keep hearing something over there. Keep your eyes open back here. All right. True story. So there was this individual that would come around occasionally. It's when we were new out here. You have those, what do you call them? Curiosity seekers who want to find out who the new people are. Long and short of it is this, and you've read it in the story, most of you. She comes by one day. I happen to be eating ice cream. So she goes on and on about how much she loves ice cream, to the point to where she had gone out and actually bought a deep freezer just for ice cream. The only thing allowed to go in that deep freezer is ice cream. And if she's at Harris Teeter, that's a local grocery store chain here, owned by the same company as Kroger. A lot of you West Coast folks might not have heard of those companies, and people, of course, around the globe. International audience here. When Harris Teeter has a buy one, get one free sale, she said she would buy a trunk or a boot, I guess over there in UK you call it a boot. We call it a trunk for the car, fill it up with ice cream to put in her deep freezer. That's how much she loved ice cream. I thought, wow, this woman really loves ice cream. So about a month later, and I see it, keep your eyes on it, see if it moves. It wasn't there before I moved, at least I don't think. My wife and I, my beautiful bride Dearly, aka Giggly Girl, were in the grocery store, and when we saw this individual, well, I had just gotten my ice cream. I had it there in the part of the cart where little kids sit, but you flip it down and put the bread and the eggs and stuff. You don't want to get crushed. I said, hey, and I held up my ice cream. I said, I got mine. Do you got yours? And she said, do I have my what? I said, your ice cream. And she then proceeded to tell me that she despises ice cream and all dairy products, never touches the stuff because she had a brother-in-law who had a gallstone caused by excessive dairy intake, and it was very painful to pass, and that she had not eaten ice cream in her adult life. The woman was in her 50s, right? At the time of this. And then she left. And I looked at my wife and I said, did that conversation just happen? And that story? And she goes, yeah. And I said, you were with me on the porch when I was eating ice cream. And she told us she bought a deep freezer just for ice cream. And she goes, yeah. I said, what is going on here? And she said, ignore her, she's crazy. My wife comes from a different culture. They don't get caught up in overthinking nonsense because, she's from the Philippines and they're concerned with eating that day. And I say this in a disrespectful way. Again, I can only control what I say. I can't control how you take what I say. I lived there for 6 years, brah. I didn't read an article in a trade journal or watch an episode on the Travel Channel. I lived there for 6 years. Their number one concern, the majority of the people, not all, but most, is how are we going to eat today? So they don't concern themselves with he said, she said, what's that person that doesn't matter to me in life, that person that is completely insignificant to me. What do they think about me? They just don't do it. So I'm like, okay, but I am an American. So I researched it. I found out it's called gaslighting. It's a form of sociopathy. It's malicious behavior. It's the people that do it are narcissists, and we knew this woman was arrogant. She just came across as a snob, snooty, arrogant snob. And they know they're doing it. Here's the thing. There's a lot of behavioral disorders where the person who do it aren't really aware of what they're doing and the effect that has on other people. For instance, ghosting. That's a big term with Generation Z and millennials. It's when you just completely drop contact with someone for no reason. You don't tell them about it. That can cause extreme hurt on the part of the other person because it makes them feel as if they did something wrong. Most ghosters, though they are narcissists and self-centered, don't really know that they're having that effect on the other person. They just do it because they don't view it as if that other person is important enough for an explanation as to why they just don't want to have any communication with them anymore. Because, of course, no one is as important as them because they're narcissists. But the thing about gaslighting is it's intentional. It's done intentionally. These people are true lunatics. They're people that we might call a socio-narc or a narco-sociopath. To be avoided for sure. I'm just telling you that. So this backstory I just gave you on this person is pretty much what I told this young doctor. So I don't want to have to repeat the story and tell it again. Because, like it's often pointed out in the comments section by our wonderful viewers, my stories have a tendency to go on and on and on and on and on. And it has a tendency to tick some people off. So we don't want to do that. I mean, if I want to tick some people off, I may as well just start talking about well-seasoned white pine. But we're not here for that. Oh. So anyway, I tell this young doctor this story, and he looks at me. And this is when he gives me my diagnosis. He says, I know what your problem is. I said, what's that? He says, you're terminal. Of course, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm like, in what way? He goes, you're terminal. In that way, in the way of terms. I'm like, Doc, I don't think I'm following you. Could you be a bit more specific? And this is when he sits up and kind of glances up at his big degree from the University of Virginia. Hey, I'm a Who's fan of their sports. Okay? So I glance up, I see that. I'm like, oh, I'm dealing with this. This guy, he's definitely the smartest guy in the room. He's getting ready to say something profound. Okay? And he goes, my new theory is called terminalism. He said, as he explained it, he said, words mean something. They mean something specific. And every generation before us have abused words and their meaning. He said, for example, he says, you mentioned to me you do homesteading, you have gardening. How far apart should I place my seeds when planting? And I said, well, Doc, the rule of thumb is pretty much 6 inches apart. He goes, stop right there. He said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Do you know where that term, rule of thumb, comes from? And I'm like, gardening? He goes, no. He said, I wanted to call you a boomer, but you're a Gen Xer. There's, for some reason, Gen Z seems to really strongly dislike boomers for some reason. I don't know why, but that's one of their ways to insult you is to call you a boomer, even if you're not. So he explains to me how the rule of thumb goes back to an early American law during a time when men were actually allowed to corporally punish their wives as long as they used a stick that was no wider than their thumb. It was called the rule of thumb. I was like, I think I have heard that, but I've forgotten. He goes, do you realize how offensive that is? I'm like, well, if you meant it maliciously, yeah, but if you're just saying it, he goes, no, stop. He says, you're terminal. That's your problem. He goes, for example, he says, I can cure you of strongly disliking anybody in your life, and we're going to start with that wonderful woman that you called a gaslighter. I'm like, okay, how are we going to do that, Doc? I said, understand, I have no relationship with this person. I need to have no relationship with this person. Why would I? He goes, stop. He says, we are starting small and we're working our way big. We're going to start with someone insignificant. In case you screw this up, or if my theory is not accurate, it won't matter so much. I was like, okay. He goes, listen, when you use the term gaslighter, what comes to your mind? And I said, well, all those things I told you about gaslighters. They're narcissists. They're malicious in their intent. They're trying to somehow practice some form of control over you, even if there's no reason to, because they're socio-narcopathic lunatics. He goes, exactly. He said, all those terms, how do they make you feel when you think of that person that you just gave those terms? I'm like, makes me feel like staying away from them? He goes, yes, but most people who are normal would strongly dislike them. I was like, okay. He goes, listen, I want you to think of that person as a storyteller. Thinking storyteller? What in the heck? He goes, storytellers are harmless. I'm like, yeah, I get that. That's what I've been trying to convince millions of people a month here on this YouTube channel that watch me. It's like so many of them, like, get a little bit perturbed when I talk about certain things. Oh. He goes, she's a storyteller. She just makes stuff up. She's not trying to hurt you or anyone else. I'm like, okay. He says, say it 3 times aloud. She's a storyteller. She's a storyteller. She's a storyteller. He said, envision her, see her in your head, in your mind's eye while you say that. So I picture this woman in my head, in my mind's eye. I say, she's a storyteller. She's a storyteller. She's just a wonderful storyteller. And I could feel like a lifting of a weight. I'm like, wow, Doc, I'm finding out my theory of not really strongly disliking someone so much might not be accurate because I just felt something lifted from me, so something had to be there. He said, exactly. He said, this is my point. Words matter. Words mean something. He said, this is my new psychoanalytic theory. It's called terminalism. And it's going to debunk all that crap you baby boomers. He said, well, not you, you're a Gen Xer, but mostly those baby boomers came up with. This is the wave of the future in psychotherapy. I'm like, so you're telling me that all I've got to do to like not really have problems in the world is to call things differently than what I do? He says, yes. I'm like, but Doc, is that really safe? I mean, for example, let's say there's somebody from my past that's very toxic, very abusive, and I call them toxic and abusive, but they're in my past, they're out of my life. Are you telling me I should view them as maybe therapeutic and loving and start a relationship with that person again? And he says, not necessarily, but my theory suggests that if you do, when you envision that person, think of them as wonderful, beautiful, non-abusive, caring, huggable, lovable, the time will come when you naturally go back and have a relationship with that person, and it will be wonderful because you have attributed a whole new line of terms to that person because you've overcome your being terminal. I'm like, okay. He goes, okay, listen, our hour is up. Our hour is up. He says, here's how it works. I've diagnosed you. You're terminal. There's a free diagnosis. I feel that you've come to see how my new way of psychoanalytic therapy is going to work. It's going to take the world by storm. So if you want to see me more so that you can get better, I only charge $250 an hour. And of course, I'm thinking, man, that's a lot cheaper than the last guy. He was $375. He goes, you can come back, but I've got a homework assignment for you. Between now and the time you call me to come back, I want you to actually use this. I want you to think of somebody insignificant, again, because we're starting small, we're working our way up to something bigger. Think of someone insignificant in your life with whom you've had an experience, with whom you don't necessarily need to have a relationship. And I want you to think of how you've terminalized them in the past, terminized them. I want you to re-terminize them, and then I want you to approach them. I said, okay, Doc. And I said, I'm committed because I don't want to be committed. And a lot of folks on my YouTube channel, I told him what I did for a living. Of course, he laughed as if I'd told him I was from West Virginia. But then he stopped when he asked me how I actually make my money and how would I pay him. And I told him, and he stopped laughing. He said he had to check into to how that's done. But I said, these folks are saying I should be committed. I don't want that. So I'm committed to this new line of therapy. I'm going to give it a shot. He says, great. And I went to shake his hand. And of course, he didn't want to shake my hand. And I think that's a Generation Z thing too. He said something about how his generation was setting trends and that's why his thing would work. And I asked him what he was talking about. And he said something about Wall Street. He read a Wall Street article that said they're the largest generation in U.S. history. So the things they're buying is setting trends. And I was like, I don't quite think that's the same thing. And whatever. That was a whole, doesn't really have anything to do with this story. But so I get in the truck. I start to come home. I'm way over on the other side of town. It's a really neat kind of town. They got lots of new fancy schmancy eateries there that sell overpriced food that's okay. The service is terrible, but it looks really nice. And I go by this one street where I remembered I used to be a mailman, right? In Charlottesville. I hated that job. It made me miserable. I'm happy that I'm not there anymore, though I did work with some wonderful people, okay? There was this one day, it was an Amazon Sunday. On Sunday, we would deliver packages for Amazon Prime, okay? We could not go back to the post office until we had delivered every single package. So there was this one wonderful woman I used to work with. Her name was Sylvia. Hey, Sylvia, if you're watching, hi. She had one package. She couldn't find the address. You'll have to forgive me. I thought I heard a mysterious creature screaming from the forest. So anyway, I drive by. Sylvia's mail truck's parked there at a collection of mailboxes, and she's standing out there smoking a cigarette. I stop. We'd been looking for this house for 3 hours. Seriously, one house. Couldn't find it. She said, you want to smoke? I said, I quit years ago because I did smoke for a very short period of time when I was in the Army. All we could do was smoke and cuss. So, when we're in Iraq. So I said, I quit, but yeah. So I took one, right? I'm smoking. There's this guy up on this porch of this house who, while we're smoking, he just yells at us. He goes, hey. We turn around, we look at him. I took notes. This is how the old me would have described this guy. So I'm trying to implement this new theory called terminism or whatever. I would have described him as a mean old cuss. I wrote this, look, this video is not scripted. I get a lot of that too. This video is not scripted. I just wrote some notes here. He's a mean old cuss. He yells, are you effing MFers gonna effing do any effing work today? Of course, he didn't hyphenate like I did. He used real words. I said, we are working. I said, this is Amazon Sunday. We're just delivering packages. There's no mail for you today, sir. He goes, oh, well then quit blocking my view. He had a view of a ditch line or something. He says, stop blocking my view and get the F down the effing road. The other day I was making a video and some strange creature did like a belly low crawl behind me here. I thought I just saw it again. So maybe, hey, I'm getting help, folks. Don't even put it in the comment section. I ended up like this because of this help I'm trying to seek. I'm getting to it. So he says, I bet if I come down off that porch and kick you into F&A, you'll get on down the road and stop blocking my MF and view. And I look at my friend, and then there's this ugly old hag sitting beside him, says, if that don't work, I'll come down to help him do it. Y'all get on out here. Well, I knew what that meant because I'm from Appalachia. Get on out here means get on out of here. So I said, come on, Sylvia, we better go. So we got in the trucks. We finally found that house. I found a house. Didn't have a number on it. There just happened to be a beautiful young lady in the yard. She's like a late 20-year-old girl. I said, hey, do you know where such and so it is? She goes, oh, that's here. And I'm like, hey, all right. So I get out. I'm like, me and my coworker's been spending 3 hours trying to find your house. You should put numbers on your house. And she's like, that's what FedEx and UPS and JSLD and everybody else has been telling us for the last 3 years since we've lived here. I said, ma'am, you have no clue. I said, me and my partner could have been back at our office 3 hours ago and home with our families and whatever. I kind of went off on her. She didn't look so pretty anymore after that. Jeez. So anyway, on the way home, after seeing the doctor who told me I'm terminal, I stopped in front of that guy's house and I said, I'm going to make this work. So I said, what's the opposite? That's why I wrote this down. What is the opposite of mean old cuss and ugly old hag? And I came up with nice young gentleman and beautiful young lady. So I parked the truck across the road right there by the mailboxes. I look at him. I say, he's a nice young gentleman. And what a beautiful young lady that is sitting there beside him. It's a nice young lady. Wait a minute. Nice young gentleman and a beautiful young lady. Nice young gentleman and a beautiful young lady. So I opened the door to get out of the truck. They're standing up looking at me by this time. And this nice young gentleman says, who the F are you and what in the F do you want? And I said, oh, I was just driving through the neighborhood and I happened to look up and see such a nice young gentleman with such a beautiful young lady sitting there and enjoying the beautiful view of this gully over here. It's not a ditch line. That's not even a gully. It should be called like a, what do you call that? Grand Canyon? The canyon, like it's a beautiful canyon over here. And the beautiful young lady says, what in the holy H word, not hate, but hell, are you effing talking about, you effing whatever? She called me a bunch of stuff I won't even hyphenate because it was terrible terms. Terrible about a certain group of people who just have different preferences than others. And so I said, well, I just wanted to, it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful world. I saw two beautiful people. I just thought I'd come up and say hi. Well, the nice young gentleman says, you better not effing come up here. And of course I think, well, according to termology, that's an invitation to join him on his porch. So I cross the road and walk through the yard and I start going up the porch. Well, the beautiful young woman, she wasn't so brave after all. She started freaking out. She says, you lunatic, Don't you come up here touching me. So, of course, I think, according to this young professor's or psychiatrist terminology theory, that would mean, you perfectly sane man, please come up here and touch me. I thought, man, there might be something to this. So I get up on the porch, and that's kind of sort of the last thing I remember. I mean, I have visions of him having me around the head in a headlock and her grabbing my arm and twisting it up behind my back. And then the next thing I know, I'm coming to, and I'm like face down beside my truck. And they're saying, get the F out of here. And she's saying, get out here. I'm like, I know what that means. So here's my take on terminology. Yes, I'm terminal. Okay, doc, but guess what? I'm not going to be calling you back either, any more than I called the other guy back that said I had Yabbitt's disease. Call it a theory, but I kind of strongly believe that 2 + 2 will always be 4. A rose by any other name will always be a rose. And given some of this psychoanalytical crap out there versus my kind of crazy, I'll take my kind of crazy any day over that. If you're watching, doc, view this as a mic. And you other doc, if you're watching, view this as a mic. For everybody else who wants to judge me, have some well-seasoned white pine, but view it as a mic.